Hey, what is going on, guys? Max Settings here, and welcome back to another review. So in today's review, this is one of my more requested videos, which is going to be the Sennheiser HD800. Now, the first thing I know that we all have to get out of the way here is, why is this pair red? And that's because this is my personal pair of HD800 that I have painted a metallic flake red and black. Red is my favorite color, and I know you all are going to say I ruined it and made it gamery. And you can say that all you want, but this is my personal pair, and I like the red and black. And you'll see a little bit more why I did that when we get into the build segment of this video. But yeah, that is why this particular pair is red and black. But anyway, the HD800 is quite the legendary headphone. It originally came out in 2009 and has been Sennheiser's flagship pretty much ever since. It was followed by the 800S and the 820, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But yes, it's a very highly regarded headphone. Some people love it, some people hate it. And it does some things really well and does some things not that great. But overall, it is quite a good headphone, as you'll see when we talk about it a little bit more. Okay, so getting things started off here with some basic specs. These are a dynamic headphone. They have an impedance of 300 ohms, a sensitivity of 102 dB per volt, frequency response of 6 to 51,000 hertz. They weigh 330 grams. And the original MSRP was $1,399 or $1,399.95. But anyway, these were originally a $1,400 pair of headphones, but the original HD800 is no longer made anymore. It has been replaced by the HD800S. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the sound segment. Of note, this particular pair has been at what they call SDR modded, or Super DuPont Resonator, also known as the French mod, which is about, I think it's a $27, $28 modification that you do to the original HD800 that makes it similar to the HD800S, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the sound segment. So keep in mind, this review of the HD800 is going to be with the SDR mod. It will not be necessarily 100% applicable to the HD800 not modded. So just keep that in mind. So then moving on to the build. So a lot of people say the HD800 is a really well built headphone, and I've never personally really shared that opinion. I don't think it's horribly built by any means, but I don't think it's like spectacularly built. I think the build is a little too plasticky, especially for its original price point, and they've had some particular issues with the build, particularly in the paint. But anyway, so on the top you'll see there's a metal part that says Sennheiser HD800 with your serial number and made in Germany. But then other than that, pretty much the rest of the build is plastic. This part's plastic, all the red pieces here are all plastic. Metal grills, the little black parts here are plastic. The silver part's like the metal mesh that's part of the driver diaphragm, I believe. But then one of the areas where the original HD800 had problems was the silver paint that was used. It was very prone to chipping. You'll see people talk about they just sit it down on a table and the paint chips. And that makes it very hard to find a used HD800 that is not chipped, because that is a common problem with these. And a lot of pairs have that issue. So if you have a pair of HD800 original, you're definitely going to be careful with them and sit them down on soft surfaces like a mouse pad or something. Don't be throwing them around on hard surfaces. So just keep that in mind. As for other build things, the top headband pad is not a very thick piece of foam, but it just gets the job done. Then you have the very large, very thin pads, but the ear chasm, cavity, whatever you want to call it, it's very deep, which we'll talk about a little bit more in terms of comfort. And then on the bottom you will find the limo connectors, which has also come to be known as the HD800 connector, which is used on a few other things now, like the Campfire Cascade uses this connector, and another headphone, I think it's called like the Vivo Next or something like that, also uses this connector. And for those of you that don't know, limo connectors are a very high-end brand of connectors that are used on a lot of important gear like military equipment, medical equipment, stuff like that. And basically, for anything where if a connector fails, someone's going to die, that's kind of when you use limo. So these are very expensive connectors, which we'll talk about here in a second when we get to the cables. But anyway, that is the build on the HD800. So then as for comfort, for a lot of people, these are pretty much the end game of comfort. But for me personally, they're just not quite there. I think it's just my head being weird. And for whatever reason, these hurt the top of my head after like a half hour of use. But That's not going to apply for most people. Most people can wear these pretty much indefinitely because they're not too heavy. 330 grams is not too much weight. And up top, you just have this kind of thin and kind of dense foam, the little two bumps. And I wish somebody made an aftermarket version of this, like Deconi or somebody that used the same mounting system and was just thicker and softer, because I would really like that and probably would help me out a lot. But the area where these things are going to win comfort for most people is in the cups. These cups are just really deep and just massive. These are a big headphone. They take up like half your face. But these just have these massive deep cups that most people's ears should not hit in. And they also don't have too much clamp. So lightweight, not very clampy, with massive thick, or not thick pads, very thin pads actually, but just this big deep ear cup. And that's just going to equal really good comfort for most people out there. So these should pretty much be just top tier comfort for most people out there. But for me, for whatever reason, they're just not quite there. And then as for cables, this is the stock cable that the HD800 comes with. It is a 10-foot cable terminated in 1/4 inch. And it's kind of a cloth material, but this cable is known to fray. So you see a lot of used pairs of these with frayed cables. And then after the split, it goes to this rubber. And I don't really like this cable. It's too long, it's too stiff, it's kind of janky. The 1/4 inch is really big. This is a long, thick 1/4 inch. And you can see the limo connectors here. These are very expensive connectors. These are like $40 a pair just in raw costs. So that makes aftermarket cables for the HD800 quite expensive, because the maker is going to be paying $40 just for the connectors, let alone the rest of the wire, labor, all that stuff. So yeah, HD800 cables are going to be hard to find under $100. Even the cheap like Amazon, AliExpress stuff is also very high, like $70, $80. So yeah, you're gonna be shelling out some money if you replace your HD800 cable, which I definitely recommend because I'm not a fan of the stock cable. If you have the 800S, originally it came with the 1/4 inch and a 4-pin balance. The latest revision of it has changed the 4-pin balance out for a 4.4 millimeter. And then I'm also going to shout out Periapt cables again. This is a HD800 cable that they made for me, and this is a custom color combo, red with the red and black on the upper split. This one is balanced, and the same limo connectors. This one I think cost me $125 for 7 feet, if I remember correctly, so not a cheap cable, but definitely worthwhile for these headphones because the stock cable is not very good. And then as for power requirements, the HD800 is not the most power hungry thing in the world, but it's not also easy to drive. This is like right on the edge of where your phone is going to be pushing it to a listenable volume, at least in my experience. So you're definitely going to need some kind of amplifier to get these up to their full potential. And one thing to note with the HD800, it's very, very source picky. It likes to reveal a lot about your source, your amp or your DAC. And it definitely shows off how good or bad your source is. So you're definitely going to want to play around with some sources on these. The HD800 I've used on, let me see, the THX AAA 789, Audio Guide NFB1. I've used it on the IFI Nano Black Label, IFI iCan Pro, and I've also used it on the Schiit Valhalla 2, which is actually probably my favorite amp I've used these on for pleasure listening. I really like these on a tube amp, so keep that in mind with the HD800. I know some people don't like it on tubes, but for fun listening, I really liked it on the Valhalla 2. I think that's a good pairing for the HD800. Okay, so now moving on to the HD800's sound. So getting things started off here with basic frequency response. So the bass on the HD800 is almost planar-like. It's another one like the Focal UX where it's almost perfectly flat. It's a little bit of roll-off right at the very end, but overall pretty flat across the bass region. It extends really well for a dynamic headphone. After that, by the time you get to about 1K, the frequency response starts to roll down a little bit. So it just kind of has a consistent drop-off from 1K until about 3K, and you'll go down about 5 or 6 dB by that point. After that, by the time you hit right around 4K, you start to come back up a little bit. And Then there is the infamous 6K peak of the HD800. And that is one of the big controversies when it comes to this headphone, is that peak at 6K. And supposedly it has something to do with the resonance shape of the cup. But anyway, that is where a lot of people are not going to like this headphone. There's a very sharp peak at about 6K that's like 5 to 7 dB above that baseline area. So after about 4K, the treble just comes right back up to a very sharp and narrow 6K peak. So that is where the SDR mod comes in. So it fixes that peak a little bit. It takes a little bit off of that. And that is where the HD800S tried to fix. The HD800 was fixing that 6K peak. It's a very sharp 6K peak. And then after that, the treble comes right back down a little bit, and a little bit more in line after that. It's elevated out of 2 or 3 dB above where the bass was up until about 1K. So the HD800 overall is kind of a V-shaped signature. The bass is a little warm. It's mostly flat, a little bit elevated with kind of a downward slope, with some recessed mids for sure. From that 1K to 4 or 5K area is recessed a good bit, 5-6 dB or so, and then some bright treble, that 6K peak, and the following treble after that is also elevated slightly. So these have kind of a V-shaped signature. A lot of people say these are pretty neutral. Honestly, compared to most things, they do lean towards the neutral side of things. They're more neutral than a lot of headphones, but not very, very neutral. Definitely going to be a little bit V-shaped here. Now, as for other things with the HD800, the HD800 is pretty much the soundstage king of headphones. It is just unbelievably wide. I mean, I'm struggling to think of anything that is wider than the HD800. Maybe like the AKG K1000, I've never heard that, but I could see how that could be wide, or maybe those RAL headphones or something. But pretty much this is about as wide as you're ever going to get for soundstage on a headphone. These things are just crazy. These are the Soundstage Reference. Everybody should have a pair of these just to reference for soundstage. And then imaging is also very good on these. It has a very 360 image. Like, this is almost how I wish like 7.1 surround software would present sound. These are like one of the most immersive headphones out there. And these are pretty much my favorite gaming headphones, both for immersion and for competitive play. They just the soundstage and the imaging is just really, really good. And you definitely can pinpoint footsteps very well, and they definitely immerse you in a game, even if it's not like an FPS or something. So overall, definitely pretty much top tier gaming headphones for me. I'm not somebody who memes gaming headphones too much. I think you can game in most things pretty well. Your skill matters most. But for an immersive gaming experience, HD800 is definitely going to be probably my top pick. And then as for the detail, the HD800 detail is pretty incredible. For the price points, let's talk about pricing here for a second. So originally these were $1,400. The HD800 used is selling anywhere from $600 to $800. So these things are getting pretty cheap because there's a lot of them out there. There's 55 to 60,000 of original HD800 out there that I know of. So there's a lot of them out there, and the price on these is getting low. And under $1,000, this is the most detailed headphone. I'm pretty confident in saying that I don't think there's anything out there that's going to beat these in detail for their used price point. Even at their new price point, I still don't think you're really going to beat these. There's very, very few things out there that compete with HD800 detail, even for more money, like a lot more money, like $3,000-$4,000 headphones out there that I don't think can out-resolve the HD800. The detail on these is just incredible. And this is why this headphone is used a lot for sound work. It just has crazy detail. It's like a good pair of studio monitors in a headphone. They just have so much detail and wide soundstage. And then as for dynamics, these have really good dynamics for a, well, dynamic headphone. Good dynamic range, good micro macro dynamics, so you shouldn't be lacking there in any way. So yeah, a little bit V-shaped, good dynamics, good soundstage, pretty much stellar soundstage actually, and insane detail for their price points. But the one area where the HD800 suffers is in terms of timbre. This is also not a very natural timbre like we talked about with the HD660S, although this is honestly even worse than that. This is just too, I want to say it's a little bit plasticky. The treble is a little bit more metallic, the mids are just a little plasticky, and HD800 timbre is just not very good. That is definitely its weakest area. And it's a massive downgrade compared to a 300 ohm Sennheiser here, like the HD600, which we'll talk about a little bit more when we get into comparisons here. But yeah, so that is where you're going to suffer the most with the HD800. So now let's talk about the HD800S real quick. So the HD800S followed up the HD800, and what it did was it changed these from a silver paint to a black paint. And it attempted to fix the 6K peak by putting a dampening in the driver, which is what the SDR mod tries to replicate. But when they did that, they added a lot of total harmonic distortion to the bass region, which you can see when you look at the THD graphs between the 800 and the 800S. And the SDR mod essentially does what the HD800S tried to do, but without that massive added THD. So pretty much, it's a better idea to get an HD800 and SDR modded than it is to get an HD800S, just because this is cheaper. Like I said, these are $700-800 used, and an HD800S is $900 to $1,100 used. So unless you really want the black, it's pretty much a better idea to get an HD800 over an HD800S. So then as for some comparisons here, so a lot of the things I was comparing this to I don't have anymore because I've sold it. Let's start with the Focally Lex. I think that's a good comparison because those used are, that's $500-ish now, and new, they're about the same price as these used. So I think the Focally Lex, a lot of people are going to like more than the HD800. The HD800, you have to really want this level of detail. So one thing you have to be aware of with the HD800 is you start listening to music, and if you've never heard a pair of these before, if you buy a pair of these, you're going to be listening to your music, and you're going to be going, you know, these don't sound very good. Like, I paid all this money for them, and they're just like kind of meh. And you just start flipping through tracks, and you're just like, meh. And then you hit something that's really well recorded, and these things are just like, oh my God. So the HD800 is just so resolving. It just reveals any flaw in a recording. And if your recording sucks, you're going to know it with these. They are just brutal and brutally honest to bad recordings. These are a headphone where you hear the YouTube compression. It's like that level of detail and revealing. So for a lot of people, they're not really going to want that level of intensity, especially combined with that 6K peak that even with the SDR mod can be a bit much. So I think the Focally Lex, I think a lot of people are going to like. They're definitely not on this level of detail, not that level of soundstage, but they're just a little bit more relaxing sounding, and they're not as brutally detailed as the HD800 is. So I think those are a little bit more fun, and I think a lot of people are going to like those a lot more. The LCD2, that has gone off to metal, but that thing is just a wildly different signature. Not as detailed, not as wide, although still wide, a lot heavier, a lot less comfortable, and much darker. So the LCD2 is not really a fair competitor to this, even though it's kind of in the same price point. So yeah, that's just too different of a signature. Other things around this price point, Mr. Speaker's Aeon, not a fan of. The Ethers, not a fan of. And then the other one that we're going to talk about is the Stax L700, although we're going to wait for the review of that before we talk about that in comparison to the HD800, so that'll be the next video. And then I do want to compare a little bit to the 300 ohm Sennheisers, because if you have an HD6XX, 600, 580, something like that, and you're looking to upgrade, the HD800 is not a direct upgrade to a 300 ohm 600 series Sennheiser. The sound signature is nothing alike. The timbre is nothing alike. They don't sound even remotely similar. They're just not even close to each other at all. So don't think that the HD800 is an upgrade to your 300 ohm 600 series Sennheiser headphone. But yeah, so like I mentioned, the detail on these is just almost impossible to beat. Things that beat it or come close is going to be like the Focal Utopia. I think gets pretty close or beats it, depending on who you ask. Hyphaman Susvara is really detailed. Maybe the HE1000 SE, I've heard that briefly. That seemed really detailed. A lot of people say that the ZMF Verite is pretty close to these. I've heard that at CanJam, but I'm not going to say that either way. The L700 is going to come pretty close. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. The HE6 is not quite there, but that review is coming also. So yeah, the detail on these is just hard to beat. Just no matter how much you spend, it's pretty tough. So these are just have a really good value. A used pair of HD800 is probably the best deal in headphones overall. It's just $700 for this level of technical ability, dynamic soundstage detail. It's just pretty crazy. Although I definitely would recommend that you listen to these before you buy them, because not everybody's going to like these because they are brutally honest headphones. And like I already mentioned before, play around with sources. I think these are a little bit more chill on a tube amp, and they definitely take tubes pretty well because they're decently hard to drive and in high impedance. So in conclusion, the HD800 is a pretty great headphone. It does a lot of things really well, although it definitely has its shortcomings. The paint chipping and the 6K peak and the really unnatural timbre that a lot of people just don't like. The timbre on the HD800, that's a deal breaker for a lot of people. But it does a lot of things really well. Really good comfort, at least for most people. And it has pretty much insane detail, top tier soundstage, really great imaging, pretty much the best gaming headphone out there. And it is a great headphone that I think just definitely deserves a spot in your collection. And it's definitely a good reference headphone that you should have on hand because it's just pretty much top tier in a lot of categories. So HD800 definitely gets my highest recommendation. These are definitely staying with me pretty much forever because I painted them, and it's kind of hard to sell a red HD800, but you know, I like my red. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of the HD800 here. Links to everything in the description. You can't buy the HD800 anymore, so I guess I'll do eBay listing to them. Also check HeadFi, AV Exchange, and all that kind of stuff. Periapt cables will be in the description, as well as the MiniDSP EARS graph, my Twitter, my contact email, and all that good stuff. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.